Welcome, everybody. It's time once again for the next chapter with Charlie Hedges as he explores turning the page on his life and yours. Hey, Charlie.
Hey, Paul. You know, here we are in week 6 of quarantine on our recorded date of April 29th, 2020. And today we continue our series titled Conversations in Quarantine. Since all participants are working remotely, Paul and I are working from California, albeit in private locations. And our guest comes to us from his home studio in Pennsylvania. Paul, I am really excited to introduce to our listeners my friend and philanthropic colleague, Graham Hodgetts. Graham possesses an impressive resume as a successful engineer, scientist, entrepreneur, and devoted philanthropist. His master's degree in engineering was earned from Crayton Tech in the UK, where Graham was born. Now, I first met Graham 3 or 4 years ago in 2017 in Uganda, where his company was drilling water wells for Wells of Life, the NGO I work with. Graham is the co-founder and president of a company named CEED, an acronym for, now get ready, CEED, Christian East African and Equatorial Economic Development Trust. Don't think I didn't rehearse that a few times. CEED is headquartered in Pittsburg, Pennsylvania, operates in East Africa, largely in Uganda, but now expanding to Kenya. The company not only drills water wells, as well as manages a 45-acre coffee farm. CEED has drilled more than 200 wells for Wells of Life, but they have drilled more than 350 wells in total, serving up to 300,000 residents in rural communities of Africa. In addition to the above, just to let you know Graham's credentials, he holds 22 patents and has taken 36 short mission trips to Uganda since 1999. But even more important, like most successful men, I think Graham perhaps married over his head because his wife, Eileen Enright Hodgetts, is the author of 27 books on Goodreads, and her British murder mystery, Air Raid, was named Best Book of 2019 by Kirkus Reviews. In fact, I'm wondering, why am I not interviewing Eileen? Well, believe me, I have no doubt that Graham will entertain, educate, and inspire us all. But just before we bring Graham on the air, I think it's important. He wrote to me his sort of what I'm calling philosophy of philanthropy. And I really like this. In quoting, Graham writes, "It is very difficult to bring hope to people who are sick and hungry or thirsty, but it is impossible to bring it to dead ones. Why we were born into such affluence and others into abject poverty. It is only sensible to assume that in some way it is our responsibility to tend to the sick, feed the country, feed the hungry, and provide clean water to the thirsty so they too can have hope." And as I know Graham personally, this is indeed his mantra. So with all of that, let's bring Graham onto the show. Graham Hodge, you know, I've been calling you, this is going to be very difficult for me because I've been mispronouncing your last name for 3 years. I've been pronouncing it as it's spelled, Hodgetts, and now you tell me it's Hodgetts. And so I'm going to have a hard time going through this. So I want to say, Graham, welcome to the next chapter with Charlie and our conversations in quarantine.
Just call me anything you like, Charlie.
Call you anything you like. Anything I like. Well, they will only be high things. I think the world of you. Before we go down deep, and probably pun intended with wells, but before we go down deep, can you tell me what is life like in quarantine for you and Eileen?
Well, it's actually not bad. We in Pennsylvania. We're allowed to go out to do shopping or to get exercise, walk the dog. If we go to a location like a grocery store, we have to wear a mask of some sort, although they don't specify what type of mask, just a mask. And other than that, I ride my bike, and we're making audio books for my wife, which means I spend a lot of time doing sound engineering to clean up some of her stuff. But in general, it's pretty good.
How did you figure out sound engineering? I mean, this is a bit of a complex endeavor.
I just got interested in what it would take. I mean, my wife and I both have acted in the theater in the local repertory, and so. Wait!
You have acted in the local theater repertory?
Oh yes. We've acted, directed. She's written musicals and plays. She's a national playwright of repute, and as well as writing books. And she's acted, and I've directed. I've been a musical director. I've composed and provided music for musicals. So yeah, we've been in the so-called drama scene, and so when it came time to look at the market for her books, the fastest growing market is the audiobook market, and so we looked at how do we go about narrating our own her books, and how do we get other people to come in and narrate them for us when we need special accents or special voices.
You know, of all the time that we've known each other, and it's not been that long, 3 or 4 years, and you and I have this last year started working much more closely, interpersonally in our endeavors in Uganda. This is really the first I've heard of the arts influence in your life.
Yes. Well, that's because we've been doing something else.
You are a focused man. When we're talking business, you're talking business.
That's right.
And then the funny thing for our audience to know is here you have this raw author for a wife who is immensely well known, and I had no idea. I had to Google her to find it out.
Well, you know, I try not to mix business with pleasure.
Yeah, well, the arts are, to me, they're more than pleasure. The arts really are business. I'm a strong advocate of the arts. So you guys are keeping quite busy, and you're cycling. How much do you cycle each day?
I have a 14-mile course.
You have a 14-mile course.
Yes.
You run a company that we will, we've gotten into that's a minimum of 2 businesses related. You are in the middle of research. You're in the middle of arts, and I think this is so important for people to understand, and I don't mean to embarrass you by this, but I think it's just so important to know, because we're going to go way back in your history. How old are you, Graham?
I'm 79. Be 80 in September.
Be 80 in September, and you're cycling 14 miles a day, running businesses, working with your wife. That's absolutely incredible. I'm so impressed.
Well, thanks very much. And it's God-given. It's not anything to do with me.
Yes. And even when you say it doesn't even have anything to do with you, it's really even the passion to do things is God-given.
Absolutely.
Not just the action, the passion, the natural and spiritual gifts to do that are all God-given.
Yep, and that philosophy I changed the wording slightly, because the wording should really have the gospel instead of hope, because the gospel is hope. Period.
It is. End of story. You know what I want to do right now, Graham? I had intended on bringing up this aspect of the show later, but I think in the midst of, you know, the so many mixed emotions of what's going on in quarantine and coronavirus and COVID-19, and there are people that are losing hope, people that are becoming anxious and want life to return to normal very quickly because I was told by a friend of mine, hell hath no fury like an inconvenienced American.
That's true. That's true.
and so what I want to do is I want to go back. Do you remember the Rocky and Bullwinkle show?
No.
Oh, it was a cartoon. It was one of my, you know, it's an old, when I was a kid, it's an old cartoon. And it's about what was Rocky? A squirrel or something, and Bullwinkle was a moose. And they had on there the Mr. Peabody's Wayback Machine, and he would go way back. Well, I want to take us way back to London, 1945, where you experienced life-threatening Nazi nightly air raids in London. And what I'd like to do is get your perspective on how catastrophic events can impact a culture. Today we speak of coronavirus, COVID-19, and as of today, as I said, 58,000 deaths, and that number is likely to, or not likely, is obviously going to increase. But you have lived as well during the most cataclysmic events of the 20th century, World War II. You were 6 years old during Nazi Germany's intense bombing in London, known as the Blitz. So the earliest years of your recollection was composed of the horrors of World War II. How did that impact you, and how did you feel that impacted the society of Londoners?
Well, I don't know about the Society of Londoners. I can tell you, but my reaction to the current crisis is very different from most because of that experience when I was 5 and 6 years old. Because I've still got my freedom. I can still go out in my car or on my bike or walking and not be concerned about bombs coming down out of the sky and killing either me or the people that live close to me. I was born just south of London, next to Crayton Airfield. Crayton was a target because the airfield housed a Spitfire squadron from the RAF, and so it was a target for bombing. But also the V2, the V1 was bad enough. The V1 was the terror weapon, the revenge weapon, as Hitler called it. He knew he was losing the war.
You're going to have to explain V1 and V2 to everybody. You know that. Because
okay, well,
we do not have World War II people listening that much.
Yeah, the V1 was a bomb. It was a flying bomb that flew subsonic, and it was launched in Peenemünde in Germany, and flew subsonically with a pulse jet engine, a revolutionary pulse jet engine, and it flew on a timer. So when it got over the densely populated areas in London, the timer stopped the engine, and it had a whistle on the nose of the bomb to terrify the people below. So when you heard the engine running, then it was somewhat reassuring that it wasn't coming down on you. But if you heard the engine stop, and then you heard this whistle getting louder and louder, you knew that it was coming down in your neighborhood. And they were very destructive. They killed about 20,000 people, I believe.
The V1s or the V1s and
the V1 did, yeah. But it was not as it was terrifying because you knew of its presence. But the V2 was the first time anybody had produced an intercontinental ballistic missile.
That actually entered space, right?
It went into space and it came down supersonically, so you didn't hear it. The first thing you knew was a house or a building or a factory or something had exploded and been destroyed. There was no air raid siren. There was no warning that it was going to happen, and so you couldn't shelter in a shelter because you knew something was coming at you, and so you were pretty well had to continue your life as though they didn't exist. Otherwise, life would have come to a complete standstill. They were the most deadly of all the weapons that we saw Hitler throw at us.
And as an aside, the science and engineering of the V2 was Wernher von Braun, who was later to be, came to the United States and was later to be sort of the institutionalizer of NASA, was he not?
Well, the satellite rocket that took Young to the moon was the end dream of Wernher von Braun, yes. That was ironic that he would be the one that got us to the moon.
During the bombing, you had the shelters that you could go to because you knew the bombing would come. So every evening you went into the shelters, did you not?
Right. We spent every night in the shelters, at least most of the time in the shelters. When our parents went to sleep, and God bless them, they used to go to sleep even though the bombs were falling, because they were so used to it. But we as kids, we'd sneak out and go sit on top of the shelter and kind of watch the fireworks, We
typical kids, huh?
Yeah. So, yeah. And the fact of the matter is, people complain so much about what appears to be a divided America with left versus right, and all the political almost hatred that's going on. And my encouragement is keep it up, because it's this ability to speak your mind, to impose checks and balances on your politicians that will stop the formation of a regime like the Nazis. The Nazis simply dominated the political scene and killed anybody who didn't agree with them. That's why we had the Third Reich, because it could exist because they had control over everybody's opinion. No, don't agree. Get on Facebook and say what you think. Get on your podcasts and tell them what you think. And that way there will never be another Third Reich.
That is such an interesting take, because until hearing you say that, my frustration has been that we don't have unity, that we don't have the leadership at the top that is really bringing the country together toward some sort of direction. And you're saying that that's okay as long as we have, not that it's okay necessarily, but that we have the ability to interact with that and to offer our questions or disagreements with it, in which Nazi Germany did not have. And Nazi Germany also happened, right, as Hitler's rise was right in the middle of a depression. So the Germans were looking for some sort of recognition, some sort of that we are, as a people, we are okay. We are not a despised people.
Well, they were looking for a leader to revive their pride after it had been crushed at Versailles.
Right.
Because Versailles was so punitive. It was stupidly punitive by the Allies. And you know, if you make somebody look stupid, they are going to try and revive their pride somehow, and they just did so. They just did it in steroids.
So, if we were to take from your wisdom and your experience, was it, you know, you just gave us some insight into the health of the health of free speech, basically. What sort of personal lessons do you feel like you had? Were there any life-changing aspects or life-impacting aspects of you going through those difficult times of World War II?
Not really, because my life wasn't changing. It was the only time my life changed was when the war ended, because everything before that was usual. I can remember walking across the bridge over the River Thames in London with my father and seeing all the pleasure boats, the boats that took people up and down the River Thames on sightseeing tours, and they were all moored. I thought, well, to Dad, are those troop carriers? And he said, no, they're pleasure boats. And I said, what are pleasure boats? And he said, well, they're things get on and we go and see the sights in peacetime. And my question was, well, what is peacetime?
What is peacetime? Yes.
And he had to explain what peacetime was, and it wasn't until I was 6 years old that I remember them giving me a stick with red, white, and blue ribbons on and saying, you can go outside and you can go wherever you like. Don't go too far away from home, but you can go out and wave these around and celebrate the fact that the war is over. And so I remember my sister and I, this is a very clear memory. We ran up to the top of the road and we climbed on the top of the bomb-destroyed house that had been destroyed by a V-2 rocket. Suddenly, at the end, in the middle of the day, at the end of the road, a house just basically disappeared and ended up as a pile of rubble. And we climbed on top of that rubble and waved these red, white, and blue ribbons because we didn't have flags in those days. All the cloth was being used for the war effort. And waving them in the air and realizing that something was not going to come out of the sky and kill us.
One of the differences between that scenario and the scenario we are now is that scenario had an end. There was a determinable end that you can then change your life from and make. We have no way right now, since our testing is so inept and so random and so few, that we have no idea what's the beginning, where we even really are in the state of affairs, let alone entering some kind of this is the end to the spread of the virus. And so we live with this vast uncertainty. And I have a feeling that is what's troubling people. And, some people want to protect themselves and others. And while other people are in direct opposition saying, don't pay attention to it. People are going to die anyway. Let's get out and live our lives normally. Do you have any impressions of that?
Well, let's put it all in context. Again, I lived in a war in which 6 million people died. We have a situation in which road accidents cause around 30,000 deaths a year in the United States alone, and that's growing and will continue to do so, and there is no end in sight for that. For the coronavirus, we can say there is an end, we just don't know when it's going to occur. It's the same with suicides, Charlie. Suicides, we're in the tens of thousands of suicides per year, and they're increasing. And they're increasing actually during this coronavirus. And period when we're so-called locked down. Again, suicides in general don't have an end date. We don't know when they're going to end. At least with the coronavirus, we know it's going to end, and in the end, it's going to be a blip in history. Let's keep it in context, and let's recognize that that we shouldn't be anxious. We should put our trust in the God that we trust, and be ready for a miracle.
I concur. I think that there is only so much that we that our scientists and our epidemiologists and our business leaders can do because of have you heard of the acronym VULCA?
No.
Vulnerable, uncertain, complexity, and ambiguity. And that is the world we've lived in for a number of years now, and it's just heightened during the COVID time. But that it is a vulnerable, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous culture, and we have to learn to manage our businesses and our lives in the midst of this. And the coronavirus has exacerbated that issue drastically. When you say that this is, at the end of the day, this will be a blip in the radar, that's probably offensive to some, but it is, in the scope of history, it is absolutely true. It's not, it's just the numbers tell the story.
Yeah, and from my point of view, God is still in control. He's got a reason for this. So let's not be anxious. Let's not worry about it. Let's leave it in his hands. Do what we can to mitigate it. Follow the advice of CDC and keep it to a minimum. But there's no point in being anxious, and there's certainly no point in panicking.
As I said jokingly, but it is so true, and we're seeing it, all over the country. That I love that line, "Hell hath no fury like an inconvenienced American," and it really is. The deaths are serious, but a lot of it is, to many people, just inconvenience. That they can't do what they want to do. They can't go to movies. They can't go to restaurants. They have to wear masks. They have to do, the normal life is on suspension, or what was the normal life is on suspension. But
yeah,
I don't see it being the 4 or 5 years or 5 or 6 years that we experienced in World War II.
Well, and believe it or not, we're all dying.
Well, you bring that is a perspective that I certainly, as a Christian and as a Stoic, it's a very important part of my life, is the truth of death and how that impacts my life. And that, the philosophers of old all had skulls on their desks to remind them that they're going to die, and that they must live actively in their lives right now.
Yep. As Churchill said, action this day.
Yeah, the brilliant Churchill. Let's, what I want to do is, if my producer is on the line, I want to take a quick break. We'll take a short break, and then we'll come back. Are you on the line, Paul?
Yes, yeah, I am. Gave you the thumbs up here. You're not watching your monitor.
Well, you were dead on my monitor for a while.
That's why I came back. I appeared out of the like the society itself. I appeared back out of nowhere here. The rising phoenix. Yeah.
Okay, let's do a brief break here, Paul. Hi, this is Charlie Hedges, and you're listening to The Next Chapter with Charlie. Hi, this is Charlie Hedges, and you're listening to The Next Chapter with Charlie, and my special guest, Graham Hodgetts, who is co-founder of CEED. He's a scientist, engineer, and as we have just discussed, so fascinating was experienced the Blitz in London of Nazi Germany bombing and the V1 and the V2 missiles that accounted for so many deaths, and his ideas of how we handle crisis after crisis and in the middle of crisis. But what I want to do now is I want to completely change tracks, and I want to talk just for the last 10 minutes of our conversation here. I want to talk about philanthropy. I want to talk that even in the midst of these crises, we still have a developing world that is facing, COVID-19 is just another cause of death and poverty. And I don't know, what is the number, Graham, of people in abject poverty? I mean, we're closing in on half the population of the world, are we not?
Yeah, billions.
Billions, yeah. They call them the bottom billion, and we need to. I think it's important for all of us to do something on that. And I called it you just said philosophy, but I called it philosophy of philanthropy. And that you asked the question that's really a good question, and I think it's probably there is a spiritual context to it, and that why do we, especially in first world countries and especially in the United States, why do we have it so good when abject poverty exists for almost half the world's population? How is that even explainable?
The only conclusion that I can come to, because I'm a Christian, is that in the handbook of life, which I call the Bible, Jesus gave us a commandment to love one another. Loving one another means not just saying I love you, but doing something about it. And so I believe that allowing me to be born in an affluent society and to have treasures and knowledge that other people in the world don't have is a responsibility that he has given me in order to be able to share that with the people that aren't so fortunate. And that is love in action, not just in sentiment.
I so concur. And you used a very important word that I don't think is used often in churches or in many doctrines of Christianity, and that is the word responsibility. Is that we were created, in the first chapter of the book, in first chapter of Genesis, that we were created to take care of the earth, and that was a responsibility. I always call it the divine mandate. That there were three parts of the divine mandate. We have totally ignored that part, and it is responsibility to take care of not only the environment, but the people that live in that environment. And I heard a speaker some time back that talked about the enfranchised and the disenfranchised. This speaker's point was that it is a responsibility of the enfranchised to share and promote health, literacy, life with the disenfranchised. That is our responsibility. If we are given those gifts, then we must share those gifts.
Yeah, absolutely. I believe that that's a divine mystery that we can't solve as to why it occurred that way, but we can certainly react to it and become proactive in sharing the gifts and treasures that have been bestowed upon us without us asking for them. It begs the question, why were you given them? And the answer as far as I'm concerned, is because we're responsible for being good stewards and sharing those with the people that don't have them.
I agree. And, I just completed this morning a book by the mystic Thomas Merton, and it was titled Thoughts in Solitude. And throughout this book, now mysticism is truly and correctly understood as this very deep mystical interrelationship with the essential essence and essential nature of God. But Merton is very clear that it is also, it's not just sitting in silence and in solitude with God, it is expressed in ordinary and mundane life, and that he pretty much makes the point that we only know that we love God as much as we love other people and other people on the planet. And if we say we love God, but we don't truly, our action is not just saying that we love, but our actions demonstrate that kind of love, and it's an active demonstration, then it's somewhat less than in the eyes of the mystic. And that is kind of surprising as you read the mystics and as most people understand the mystics, that one of the most profound mystics that is current mystics, Thomas Merton, that was his conclusion. And I so concur with that our love of God is demonstrated by not our love of, let's take that word away, but our actions toward other people, whether they are enfranchised or disenfranchised, and maybe even more relevant to the disenfranchised.
Yeah, I mean, the fact is Jesus didn't come to earth and spend his time standing in his carpentry shop or in the synagogue speaking about salvation. He went out and did things, including sacrificing his own life in a very tragic way in order to earn that salvation. So he showed us how to do it. And then the other thing he said was, which gives me some hope, is there will always be the poor. So don't use the fact that you can't solve the complete problem as a reason not to act in the first place. So take that first step and help that first person or that first group of people or the first 1,000 or the first million or whatever it is you're called to, because that's the task that's in front of us. Can't just wave a magic Christian wand and solve the world's problems. And he never said we could. In fact, he said we couldn't.
No, we can't solve the world's problems, but we can contribute to hope and to actual physical improvements. There are things that we can do and that we are called to do and I think expected to do.
Yeah, the second step can't happen until you've taken the first step.
Agreed. Or if it does, who knows, the second step could lead you to the first step. If you're just merely acting, it could all of a sudden you may be able to be thinking about what is the causation or what is the driving force behind all of this. And,
right.
And one thing that I like about the Franciscan view, it's a different view of the cross. Well, I take the majority view of the ransom idea of the cross, which, we're probably talking about things that the listeners are not really grasping totally, but that the Franciscan view is that Jesus also modeled for us through the cross his identification with our suffering, and that he sweated blood in the garden, and he suffered a horrendous death in which he even said, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And that he, for a moment, felt the loneliness and abandonment of God, and that he is able to mourn with us that loneliness, that misconnection, that disconnection, and can come alongside and enhance that because he so identifies with us.
It was a struggle that he had between being a man and being God.
Yes, yes. Well, Graham, we could go on theologically forever. I know that. Thank you. What an extremely prolific and expansive life you have lived and continue to live right now. You're a role model to me. And I'm only 10 years your junior, but feel like I'm 30 years your junior.
You're doing all right. You're doing all right, man.
Well, that's very kind of you. Graham Hodgetts, I want to thank you so much for spending time with me today. It's been such a pleasure.
Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you, Charlie, and thanks so much for having me, and particularly for all the work that you're leading in Uganda with Wells of Life and getting clean water to people who really need it. And God bless you for that.
Thank you. Now, do you have any problem with people getting in touch with you in case they want to chat with you about anything?
Oh, no, not as long as they're decent questions.
No answers to stupid questions. So is it okay to put your email on the show notes, or?
Yes, it's just the right one. That's all.
Yeah. Which one is the right one?
It's the Gmail.
The 940 Gmail?
Yes.
Birthday Gmail?
Yes.
Okay. That's good. Okay. All right. I want to also thank our listeners for tuning into The Next Chapter with Charlie. Be sure to check us out at our website, thenextchapter.life. And until next, this is Charlie Hedges signing off. Bye for now.
You've been listening to another example of The Next Chapter with Charlie right here in Orange County's only community radio station, OC Talk Radio.